everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel. So you all know today we are going to practice about another theory that is there, and we have been talking about new criticism. So ये video भी new critics के बारे में ही रहेगी. We are going to talk about William K. Wimsatt and Beardsley. Right, so William K. Wimsatt 1907 से 1975 के बीच में he was writing, while Beardsley का birth was 1915. So these are the two very important new critics. What is new criticism? What are the various tenets of new criticism that we have already discussed? So to revise those things again, आप दोबारा वो वाली video देखेंगे, and you will then of course study about these two theorists. We will also look at the various fallacies, the two most important fallacies that these two important new critics talked about in this video. Right. So let us study about William K. Wimsatt firstly. William K. Wimsatt 1907 से 1975 के बीच में he was writing, and he was, I must say, a professor of English. He was a professor of English at the Yale University, where he had been teaching since 1939. He was an authority. He actually was an authority on the 18th century English literature. So he had a lot of experience and was writing about the 18th century literature. His first important book that you have to remember, because they can ask books match the following May, so you should know the dates also and who has written it. Definitely the most important one is the verbal icon, but you should also know the other works that are written by William K. Wimsatt. So the first important book that he wrote is The Prose Style of Samuel Johnson, that was published in 1941. Then we have the verbal icon. The verbal icon is the most important book, and it is written by co-authored, right? So it was written by William K. Wimsatt and co-authored by another very important new critic, and his name was Monroe Beardsley, the other person whom we are discussing in this video. So these two important figures, they were working together and they wrote these two articles that were added in this book, The Verbal Icon, The Studies in the Meaning of Poetry, that came out in 1954. Actually, what is this book about? It's written in a series of essays that are collected together. So they are independent essays that are written between the time period of 1941 to 1952. Then collectively, they were published in one go in 1954 as a book, The Verbal Icon. So two ways से questions पूछे जा सकते हैं. One, they can ask you about the full title of the verbal icon. Then they can ask you also about the various essays that are there. So they can ask कि कौन से essay है. So there are two important essays that are included: the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. So the verbal icon contains two of Wimsatt's most important essays, the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. What do you mean by fallacy? Fallacy क्या होता है? कोई गलती हो जाना, कुछ गलती is fallacy, right? So लोग अक्सर एक टेक्स्ट पढ़ते हुए क्या गलती कर सकते हैं? That is called as a fallacy. That is something called as fallacy. F-A-L-L-A-C-Y. Fallacy. So there are two important kinds of fallacy, and there are two essays. Each essay is going to talk about that particular fallacy. So we have the intentional fallacy, the affective fallacy. It is co-authored with Monroe Beardsley. Then we have some other works like The Hateful Contraries, Studies in Literature and Criticism, that came out in 1965. It actually brings out some of the articles that appeared in the other journals of that time also. They first appeared as a journal, and then of course as a book it was published. Then we have The Portraits of Alexander Pope, that came out in 1965. It actually collects the unknown portraits of Pope and examines the complex relationship that is there between the poet and his paintings, or the painters that are there. So a complex relationship between these two things are seen, the painters and the poet. So you see that these are the various books. Last but not the least, this book is called as the Literary Criticism, a short history that came out in 1957. It is a collaboration with Clenneth Brooks. So Clenneth Brooks and William K. Wimsatt also wrote this book called as Literary Criticism. It came out in 1957. So let us quickly see कौन सी books है. First is the prose style of Samuel Johnson, published in 1941. Then we have the verbal icon, the studies in the meaning of poetry in 1954, where you have to see these two articles that are there. First is the intentional fallacy, then the affective fallacy. These are also two important terms that they coined, these two figures, and we will look at these fallacies. Then we have the hateful contraries, then we have the portraits of Alexander Pope and literary criticism. Now, let us talk about Monroe Beardsley. So, Monroe Beardsley, who was actually his birth date is 1915. In 1915 he was born, you can say. He was someone who was teaching philosophy. So, he taught philosophy and aesthetics in the Yale University, Mount Hoyle College, right? And of course, he also taught in the Temple University. His publications also include aesthetic problems in the philosophy of criticism. So, his publications include aesthetic problems in the philosophy of criticism that came out in 1958, and the aesthetics from classical Greece to the present. So, he is someone who talked in greater detail about aesthetics, and a lot of theorists then will study will actually position their study on Monroe's study about aestheticism. Right. So, there are these two essays that you will remember with me. So, write down, make your own notes. These two essays are the aesthetic problems in the philosophy of criticism. It is coming out in 1958, and then the aesthetics from classical Greece to the present in 1966. So, now you know about these two people who were working together, and then they wrote this book, The Verbal Icon, where you have these two essays, the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. These are also two types of fallacies that they talked about. It's like a concept that we use while reading a text. Now, we all know that what were these new critics saying? These new critics said that you need to read the text as a text per se, as an entity in itself. तो टेक्स्ट क्या है? टेक्स्ट एक एंटिटी है जो मैं देख रही हूं, ना तो मुझे अपनी बारे में कुछ ज्यादा लिखना है इफ आई एम द राइटर, ना मुझे उसको पढ़ते हुए राइटर के बारे में ज्यादा सोचना है, ना मुझे हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड देखना है, ना बायोग्राफिकल डिटेल्स देखनी है. सिर्फ एक टेक्स्ट अपने आप में एक ऐसी चीज है जो मेरे को एनालाइज करनी है. This is what all the new critics were saying. It's like a practical reading, close reading. क्या है ये? It's like a close reading. You are only close to one thing, that is the text. This is what the new critics were saying. And we are not going to confuse them with the Russian formalism, because the Russian formalism people or the theorists were focusing on the details in the way the text is written. So the formal structure, the literary devices were important for them. But these people are saying कि just pay greater focus on the text per se. So it is the difference between these two theories. Anyway, let us talk about the intentional fallacy and then the affective fallacy. Intentional fallacy is like a mistake. As I told you, fallacy is a mistake. So it is a mistake that people do when they derive meaning of the same work, taking into consideration the author's intention. अगर आप ऑथर की इंटेंशन को ही सिर्फ दिमाग में रखकर टेक्स्ट रीड करोगे, यू आर गोइंग टू मेक अ फैलेसी, यू आर गोइंग टू कमिट अ मिस्टेक, एंड दैट इज कॉल्ड एज व्हाट? इट इज कॉल्ड एज इंटेंशनल फैलेसी. नाउ लेट अस टेक अ मिनट, लुक एट दिस पेंटिंग. This is the most important painting, and we all know it is Leonardo da Vinci's most important painting, Mona Lisa. Of course, he painted this painting, and a lot of people have, they discuss about it, कि इस painting के अंदर is Mona Lisa having a scornful face, or is she smiling? What kind of smile is this? Right? So each and everyone is going to interpret this painting according to themselves. And this is what intentional fallacy is about. If you just only look कि हमारे पेंटर ने लियोनार्डो क्या चाहते थे आपको सोचने में, तो आप क्या कमिट कर दोगे? यू आर गोइंग टू कमिट दिस क्राइम दैट इज देयर व्हाइल यू आर रीडिंग अ टेक्स्ट, एंड दैट इज द इंटेंशनल फैलेसी. So what you have to do is to read the text, look at the painting and interpret it according to yourself. So you have to just do what? You have to relate yourself with the painting. This means that the new critics were saying that there can be multiple readings of a single text. If you commit this fallacy called as intentional fallacy, then you will have only one meaning, and that too the meaning according to the painter or the writer or the author. This means that the death of the author is the same concept that the intentional fallacy people were saying. Intentional fallacy, death of an author, all these things are saying that author ne text likha and now author is no more. Author was like a father entity, and now after giving birth to a text, just as the father is there and then of course the birth of the child happens, and after that the child is on its own. The father is only there to help the child, and then the child will bloom on its own. Similarly, the author has written the text, and now you don't have to consider what the author is or was writing. ठीक है, या उसने किस इंटेंशन से लिखा है. So what is more important is what you interpret from the text or from the painting. So ये मोनालिसा की painting can be different to different readers. A single text can be different to anyone. So if you only look at the author's intention, then you are committing intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy, according to Wimsatt, derives from confusion between the poem and its origin. If you keep on thinking about the origin, that author ने क्या बोला होगा, author क्या सोच रहे थे, biographical details क्या है author की, तो आप ये वाली fallacy commit करोगे. When readers become over judgmental, they misjudge the literary work. If you become over judgmental and you only think about the author, you are going to misjudge the text and you are going to leave the critical details that are there. Focus on the poem, not on the poet. So what is important? Focus on the poem, focus on the text that is there in front of you. Focus on these things rather than focusing on the author's intent. So this is called as intentional fallacy if you only focus on the author. Right? So not to commit this fallacy, you don't have to think about the author. Right? So to protect yourself from committing this mistake, you have to read the poem as it is. You don't have to look at the biographical details. As compared to this, we have another fallacy. This is called as affective fallacy. अब जब हम word देखते हैं affect, we know this is coming from emotions. तो अगर आप ज़्यादा emotions use कर लेते हो, तब भी problem होती है. So it refers to the confusion between the poem and its result. Sometimes you overanalyze, overjudge it according to yourself. Maybe the author was saying something else, but you overanalyzed it. Then it is what? Affective fallacy. It refers to the error of placing too much emphasis on the effect that the poem has on the audience when analyzing it. You are only looking at the effect it created. It can be love, it can be humor, it can be horror, anything. But you are only focusing on the effect that it created. So you were reading Charles Dickens and you loved it. It is your personal bias. You had a good impact after reading it, right? It does not mean that this is going to make the writer a brilliant writer. Right? So you don't have to only look or judge a book or a text by the effect it creates in your mind, right? So Wimsatt and Beardsley say that the work is independent of both the author and the reader. The work is itself a living entity. The text has meaning of itself. Text का अपने आप ही एक meaning होता है. Text has meaning in itself. Text का अपने आप एक meaning है, and you do not have to critically judge over everything, and you don't have to look or tap on the emotions that you are getting. So दो तरीके की fallacy है. अगर आप अपने बारे में ज्यादा सोच लोगे, अपने emotions ज्यादा सोचोगे, so you're going to commit effective fallacy. If you think about the author's intent, you are committing an intentional fallacy. Right? So in the effective fallacy, the author disagrees with the theories of I.A. Richard. अगर आप effective fallacy कर रहे हो, तो आप disagree कर रहे हो I.A. Richard की theories के साथ. Richard, in the principles of literary criticism and the meaning of meaning, makes a clear distinction between the emotive and the referential uses of language. उन्होंने in this book, very important books by I.A. Richards, Principles of Literary Criticism and the Meaning of Meaning. These are the two books that are written by I.A. Richard. He clearly said that there is a distinction when you are reading a text or a poem. there is a distinction between emotive and referential uses of language. कुछ चीजें सिर्फ आपको सिखाने के लिए, बताने के लिए यूज होती हैं, कुछ चीजें इमोशंस इवोक करने के लिए. The affective fallacy attacks the vague emotions that are there about the poetry. So बहुत ज्यादा जो vague emotions आपके पास आ जाएंगे, that is affective fallacy. An affective fallacy attacks these emotions. और I.A. रिचर्ड्स बैलेंसिंग ऑफ इम्पल्सेस. I.A. रिचर्ड ने इसको बैलेंसिंग ऑफ इम्पल्सेस कहा है. Poetry relates more to knowledge than to emotion. So what you have to remember that poetry is more important कि वो लिखा क्या है, वो टेक्स्ट आपके पेज पे लिखा हुआ कैसा दिख रहा है. Whatever is on the page, that's more important, right? Rather than the emotions. If you only think about emotions, then you are committing a fallacy. I.A. रिचर्ड्स ने क्लोज रीडिंग के बारे में बोला एंड प्रैक्टिकल रीडिंग के बारे में बोला, बट ऑफ कोर्स ही टैप्ड over emotions a lot, and there were various theorists who said that emotions सब कुछ नहीं होते हैं. You have to look at the referential reading, the referential ways in which you can read the text. Now what you have to do as your homework, in the comment down below you have to tell me that कौन से ईयर में ये दो बुक्स आई थी, द प्रिंसिपल्स ऑफ लिटरेरी क्रिटिसिज्म एंड द मीनिंग ऑफ मीनिंग. अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स दीज क्वेश्चंस हैव बीन आस्क्ड. दिस इज अ PYQ. आइए रिचर्ड्स दे देते हैं, मैच करना होता है विद द बुक्स दैट ही हैज रिटन, या फिर डेट्स भी पूछ सकते हैं. So you should know these two books, Principles of Literary Criticism and The Meaning of Meaning. These are written by I.A. Richard, who was the father of New Criticism. Okay, so let us quickly revise. फटाफट से देखते हैं. These are the two fallacies that we have. So we have Wimsatt and Beardsley, who talked about these two fallacies, affective fallacy and the next is intentional fallacy. So intentional fallacy, if you judge the text according to the author, what was author talking about, why author wrote this, what was the intent of the author. If you keep thinking about all of these things, आप intentional fallacy commit करोगे. You should focus on the poem, not on the poet, and you will commit affective fallacy if you do not understand that the text has its own meaning. You don't only look at the emotions but the meaning behind it as well. And जितनी भी बारी आप टेक्स्ट रीड करोगे वो अलग तरीके से ही दिखेगा. There can be multiple readings of a single text. Each and everyone will read it differently according to different situation. So for example, if you have seen this movie Tamasha, जब आप छोटे थे तब आपने ये मूवी देखी होगी, it would impact you in a very different way. But if you see it now, because these are the struggling years, इसके अंदर सब लोगों, you have to find your goal, तो आप वो मूवी को अलग तरीके से इंटरप्रेट करोगे. द मूवी विल हिट यू इन अ वेरी डिफरेंट वे. सिमिलरली वन टेक्स्ट कैन हैव डिफरेंट मीनिंग्स according to different situations, and you have to pay critical focus to the text, right? So I hope you understood these two fallacies and these two important theories that are there related to new criticism. If you have any doubt, you can ask me that in the comment section and I'll surely reply to you. Thank you.